Good evening and welcome to Viewpoint. This week we're taking a closer look at the 2026 budget. Fabian Picardo's final budget as Chief Minister was one of his longest and one of his most personal. But beyond the reflections on his time in office, there were major announcements on public sector pay, pensions, the minimum wage, government debt, taxation, and the changes now coming in with the UK-EU treaty. Tonight, we'll hear from a series of representative organisations and experts, each giving their reaction to the budget and what it could mean for workers, pensioners, businesses and Gibraltar's public finances. My first guest is Graham Jackson. He is the chairman of the Association of Tax Advisors and a tax partner at Hassan's. Graham, thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening.
So, first of all, I want to ask you about company tax, which is estimated to fall from 252 million to 210. How significant is that drop, and is the fall mainly linked to loss of revenue from gaming?
Yes, so the 40 million figure that Minister Feetham has been talking about for quite some time is based on a loss to Gibraltar as a result of the rise in remote gaming duty in the UK, the last budget that Chancellor Reeves did in the UK. That figure is obviously only an estimate. We cannot see how that is going to unwind. Companies change behaviour. It is unlikely that a company will just take a hit to its profits like that without changing how it behaves and tries to make savings and protect profits for its investors. So whilst it's right to take a conservative approach, that figure must be remembered to be an estimate.
And it could change as well depending on which way the political winds are blowing in the UK as well, because we're probably going to have a new Prime Minister in the next few months. They always want to bring in their changes and their influences.
So I don't think that what we will see is a reduction in remote gaming duty. So I think if anything, it could get worse, but it won't get better.
Okay, so the budget includes 25 million from global minimum tax. Can you explain to us what that means?
So the OECD introduced a global system to guarantee that companies pay a minimum of 15% on their accounting profit, wherever they are in the world, so you can't just move your company around and get a better tax rate. That is a result, so that 25 million is the first year of collections of that, what's called top-up tax. We implemented that in line with the EU. Some jurisdictions are implementing it this year, but everybody's doing it eventually. So we are seeing that 25 million, the first returns for the global minimum tax rate were filed on the 30th of June. So hopefully that 25 million is based on those returns, so we can see it as a real figure. But one of the things that we don't quite know yet is how that will interact with what's listed as the corporate tax take. So even though they're two different systems, they're both taxes paid by companies on income. So we're not going to see. Well, I think we need at least a year to see how that unwinds properly, but I do believe that 25 million figure will most likely be based on actual tax returns.
Okay. The big question mark is over the transaction tax, at least for traders in Gibraltar, and how that will affect them. Can you give us an indication of how the transaction tax works and what traders need to know and what we know now as a result of this year's budget?
So the thing about the transaction tax is for a pure tax person, technical tax person, it's not really a tax. It's an import duty. Mm. If we think about it like a new rate for import duty, conceptually in our heads, it's very easy to understand. Now, there are obviously other differences. So if you're manufacturing in Gibraltar, which we don't have a huge manufacturing sector, but if you are, there's like a single phase VAT style tax on that. But I don't think traders should be concerned that there's a conceptual shift in the way this is being applied. I mean, people have been on GBC lots and lots of times to talk through the press releases that we've had about how it's going to work, and it's in the treaty. So I don't think there's anything that should be concerning other than the admin. Now, admin is always a big issue. This is being done very quickly. The OECD suggests between 1 and 2 years to implement a tax like the transaction tax. we've got however many days left. So I think that it's the admin that's the big issue rather than the tax itself.
Okay, let's talk about the big figures, the global figures. Revenue up, GDP per capita as well, which the Chief Minister himself admitted is not a reflection on how people feel on the ground in terms of wealth, but generally all signs pointing in the right direction.
So everything, I mean, up is good, right? I think I probably agree that a few years ago, I think Sir Joe suggested that we could move away from GDP per capita to GDP per worker, at least as an extra statistic, because we do have access to a big labour pool across the border, and the gross domestic product includes their work, but the per capita doesn't include them. So the figures might be slightly skewed by our specific situation. But I think that if it's going up, then it's going up because the workforce isn't growing as fast as GDP per capita is. So I think that we're seeing the economy growing, definitely. And I think that with the increased technology, we will see that GDP per worker figure change as well as a result of greater technology.
In terms of personal taxation and personal income, and in terms of budget measures, no particular announcements, but anything that caught your eye? So
there is an allowance for musicians who want to buy instruments.
That's something.
It's something. It's great if you're a musician. I think it may very well be tied to the GMF coming back. I don't know whether that's a thing.
It's been an arrangement that has come into place by negotiation with the Musicians Association.
And that's great, and that's the value of the associations existing in GIB, that they can go and say, we've got a particular problem, and the fact that we've got a government that's so close to the people, it can make those decisions. I mean, you would never get that in the UK. I mean, it just wouldn't. They're just too far away. So I don't think we've had a period of radical change since Minister Feetham came in, because he's been very active, making changes, bringing in the global minimum tax, bringing in the property charge, bringing in the changes to the taxation of insurance companies. And I think that this year was always going to have to be a period of consolidation while those things work their way through. There is a change to the accommodation allowance, which has only just come in recently. It won't be announced in this, but it won't be in this budget because it was announced in the last budget. But it's only really just kicking in now, and people are starting to work through how that works.
And finally, if you had to identify risks in the budget from a tax perspective, anything that caught your eye?
I think it's and Mr. Feetham raised this, it is the uncertainty around that 40 million figure and the newness of the 25 million in the minimum tax, global minimum tax, which I think is obviously informed why they've not been profligate or changed things too much, because they want to see how that works out. I think that's where our risk is. Is that 40 million actually going to be 60 million because there's no way to fix it? Or is it only going to be 20 million?
But it's a question we can't answer.
But we can't answer yet. We just need to let the year work out and batten down the hatches and hold our breath and see what happens.
Graham Jackson, thank you very much for joining us. We now turn to the Chamber of Commerce and its president, John Isola, who joins us on set now. John, good evening and welcome to Viewpoint.
Good evening.
I wanted to ask you first about the transaction tax and how the end of the old import duty model will affect businesses locally.
Well, clearly it will affect them in that their cost base is going to increase. So any business that is trading in goods is going to see an increase of anything from 0 to 12, which are the current rates, mostly at the lower end of that scale, going up to 15%. And that is obviously going to have an impact on competitiveness. So there's nervousness about that competitiveness, and businesses in Gibraltar trading in those goods were already feeling it and finding it difficult to compete with businesses on the other side, even at the lower rates. So now that challenge is even bigger. And clearly, there's also a lot of concern about all of the bureaucracy in terms of importing goods that actually changes in some respects, and getting one's head around that. So that is obviously an indirect cost burden too.
Do you have more clarity, at least as a result of this budget?
In respect of the treaty,
Well,
the budget hasn't really clarified anything that we didn't know already. I think over the last few weeks things have become clearer, but there are still, as one would expect, grey areas in more to do with processes that are not totally clear, and we're hoping that those will be cleared up in the next 48 hours or so. And if they aren't, one thing that we would very much request is that there is tolerance at official level and support as businesses assimilate to the new environment.
Well, just to make it clear to our viewers at home that this interview is pre-recorded, and it has been pre-recorded at a time when the business minister was still on her feet and nearing the end of her speech, but at least you managed to get some input into what she had to say, but not all. That's why I want to make that caveat. Would it be fair to say that retail and hospitality are among the sectors which are most affected? And if so, what support would you say that they need now?
Well, retail and wholesale, principally because they're importing and reselling goods. Hospitality to an extent, because whilst food is not subject to the transaction tax, alcohol is, and alcohol excise rates are also increasing considerably. So hospitality to an extent. But hospitality, one would hope that as a result of the free-flowing border, might benefit from extra footfall. So I think the bigger concern is for retail and wholesale. And I think those sectors are concerned about what support they have and the support measures that have been announced so far. And you're right to caveat it, because I don't know whether the minister has announced anything further in that regard. But I think they feel that the support measures are not enough. They would like far more support, because otherwise their situation could be difficult in terms of making that change to the new environment and finding new areas of business that may stand the test of time. But I think the budget, in our view and our members' view, and in particular those trading those sectors, is hugely disappointing, because at the end of the day, the transaction tax has been introduced, we are told, to level the playing field with the other side of the border, to ensure that there isn't this difference in pricing. Yeah? But the minimum wage has been increased by more than inflation, and this is not, I think it's 3 or 4 years that we've had above increase, inflationary increases in the minimum wage. And those very businesses, the sectors which are affected by the transaction tax and which have to now evermore compete with similar businesses on the other side of the border, are now going to have to pay a much higher minimum wage, and it's a minimum wage that is considerably higher than the minimum wage across the border. And it needn't have increased by more than inflation. Labour is an important factor in any business model. And also, if you think that the majority of people at that level who work in retail, wholesale, hospitality, are actually cross-frontier workers. So they're not subjected to the high cost of living in Gibraltar. The cost of living on the other side of the border is much lower. So one has to question why the need to increase the minimum wage by more than inflation. The minimum wage in Spain at the moment is £7.20 per hour. It was actually increased in Spain by 3.1% from 25-26. We are going to £10. So not only is the increase higher than the increase that has been made in Spain, we're significantly higher, £2.80 higher per hour than what a business in Spain that is now going to compete directly with similar businesses in Gibraltar.
Well, I suspect that it's not easy to differentiate between employees who are cross-border workers and employees who are based locally, and the ones who are based locally do face the higher cost of living.
But I would say that a very, very large percentage of those workers on the minimum wage are cross-frontier workers. That's besides the point. You know, at the end of the day, these businesses are now going to have to compete on a level playing field, supposedly, with businesses in Spain, similar businesses. There is already higher costs in Gibraltar than in Spain, which haven't really been taken into account in the treaty, and our members are concerned about that. But to now have to tolerate an increase in the minimum wage and above inflation is just a little too much. And I think our members in wholesale and retail, with all that's coming in terms of additional transaction tax, concerns about competitiveness, that our own government has actually foisted this large increase in the minimum wages, is they're not happy about it at all.
In terms of the public sector pay rise, I know that it doesn't affect your members directly, but do you consider that perhaps there is a knock-on effect on
absolutely, and it does
wages?
affect our members, and it affects the private sector. You know, people have to realise that the private sector is the engine of the economy. That engine is the engine that produces the tax take that then pays for these for benefits, for services, and for the public service. So at the end of the day, if the cost of the public service increases, their tax take needs to increase, or if the economy grows even further than that, that's covered by the extra take from the growth in the economy. But at a point where, and I think the Chief Minister said this is the biggest change to our economy in 55 years, one needs to question whether awarding or making an award of the sort that's been made, and over a 10-year period, I believe, whether that is wise in the context of the changes that our economy is going to face in the next year or 2 years on the back of the treaty.
Do you have any comments to make on the equalisation of pensions? Or is it not something that affects the Chamber directly?
It affects me, I suppose. No, and just sorry, one other point in terms of the public service, you know, and the wages. There is the average wage in the public service is 40% higher than the average wage in the private sector. Recruitment is a big issue in the private sector, and having that huge difference, which if the private sector would ever have to meet those levels, it would be the end of our economy because we wouldn't be able to compete, is a problem, and actually is, I would say, socially divisive. So I think that is an issue for the community, and it's an issue for the private sector, which after all is what feeds this community in terms of the generation of economic activity and the taxes that are collected as a result of that.
So if you had to sum up how you feel about this budget as an association, it would be? Well,
again, I haven't heard the Minister for Business and I at all, so just to correct me slightly, I haven't heard what she's had to say, but I think clearly it's good that the economy is growing. I think that belies that there are certain sectors of the economy that are not growing and possibly in decline. And I think that generally speaking, the budget is really not that positive for business. There's nothing in it that is positive for business. In fact, for certain sectors, I think it's detrimental.
Okay, John Isola from the Chamber of Commerce, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We now turn to the unions, and specifically the GGCA union, the union representing civil and public servants, and with me is its president, Darren Sarisola. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So, largely, this will be a good budget for your members and for public servants in Gibraltar?
I think if we look back at obviously previous negotiations, recent previous negotiations and the past couple of years, I think they have been meaningfully far better than what we've had. So, and I think it's historically better, in my opinion.
So the deal aims to restore 12.6% loss in purchasing power, and that's over the first 5 years. Then there's another 5 years of adjustment. So is that 5 years something that you're happy with, or is it something that you've had to compromise on?
Well, it's something that was within the mandate that we had. So it was something that was discussed with the working group that we had, and certainly something that was part of our negotiation, something we were comfortable with in terms of what has been negotiated. So it does fall within the framework of our negotiations, really. So yeah, we're happy with it.
And what sort of difference will public servants notice in their pay packets? Obviously, it's a broad workforce, but
I mean, this year it's 5%. So yeah, I should think, especially for the lower earners, it's a significant. Like I said, if we look at the climate of what we had and what we have, it is a significant and meaningful, obviously, deal, which will have a positive impact, hopefully, especially on the lower earners.
Let's look at some of the details. So the annual recovery payment is 2.5% plus inflation, with deferral possible if inflation goes above 2.5%. Now that's an important factor as well, because it protects the government from having to pay out too much. But is that protection strong enough?
Well, it is, because it's got the consultation process, so that it will be done within a consultation. It was between, 12 to 36 months was the deferral?
Yes.
But I mean, the deferral is basically, there'll be obviously a discussion, and it's not a loss, so complete loss, where you say, look, we've got this economic situation and we'll go back. So it's given an assurance that we're not going back as we've done previously, and see ourselves in the situation we've seen before. We've been in a situation where we can obviously look at what is happening, what is the deferral going to be, and agree on when that is going to be repatriated.
So that's an important detail. Any deferral will involve a negotiation.
Of course. So anything that involves consultation and negotiation gives us strength, because we're able to have an input and a say into us how and when it's going to happen.
Okay. Do you have a lot of members earning above £100,000?
No, we don't have that many, but we have a significant, but the majority are the lower earners.
Right. So that not a lot of people in your union will be affected by that reduced threshold then, because over £100,000 the threshold.
So the majority has negotiated and agreed to what has been negotiated, although, like I said, we understand the over the 100,000 threshold that people still are owed, and if you look at the recovery that they're going to get, it's still sort of, in terms of amount, it amounts to more or less what the lower earners are going in. So although it is understandable, the situation, we also need to see the fact that the scale of the higher earners are one that is negotiated really in terms of appointment. They're not really part of a pay spine. So, I mean, it's understandable. It's, I think, reasonable what is being put on the table to a certain extent.
Okay, so the minimum salary in the public sector, £24,413. That's a pretty decent salary for an entry point, isn't it?
It is fantastic. It is fantastic. I think it's really good for an entry point. Again, looking at...
How many people will that affect? I mean, that's the starters.
I would be lying if I could give you an exact figure. I tell you, what I can tell you is the concerns and things that are coming in terms of how it could affect in terms of the scales going up, and then compared to coming back to the higher earners, it slightly compresses the pay spine, so perhaps there needs to be a review of the pay spine to see how that affects, like I said, going up. Yeah, you start at a certain wage. So, for example, AAAO. Yeah.
And I imagine that will be.
And then we talk about, like I said, the caps. So it's over 100, which is good this time round in terms of, you know, but still, if we look at it, it's going to compress the pay spine and causes disparities in terms of responsibilities and all that.
57 new AA posts as well. Those will be on that minimum salary.
And that's
Imagine
really,
you're
really
happy
good.
with that as well.
Very happy, very happy.
Okay, public servants with more than 15 years service getting 2 extra days of annual leave. How important is that in terms of the wider package?
I think it's really, really good. Again, as part of the well-being, obviously, campaign there is. I think it's, like I said, and after the 15 years, so it's sort of giving recognition to the long years of service. So a step in the right direction.
So several thousand public servants in Gibraltar. Of course, those in the private sector may look at some of these benefits that public sector workers are getting and saying, well, we haven't had an increase in a long time because of the and the rate of inflation affects us too. Is that understandable?
It is understandable, and look, at the end of the day, Jonathan, this has been the public sector pay negotiation. That doesn't mean that we cannot do anything and shouldn't do anything for the private sector. That is A. And B is, when we negotiate the public sector pay rise, we also always have to keep in mind that a contributor to that public sector is the private sector. So that relationship needs to be then understanding. But like I said, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, and we're not going to look at what's happening within the private sector. This is a public sector pay negotiation, but that doesn't mean that we have to forget what's happening in the private sector. We haven't had to date, the GGCA hasn't had a collective representation from the private sector saying, look what is happening with us. I can tell you that I haven't had anybody coming, as in even a small number from the private sector saying, well, look, this is what we're not happy with. The moment we get a representation, we'll be more than happy to obviously look into it and see what can be done. But yeah, I agree that they should be treated equally. You know?
Is this also, I just wanted to ask you, do you think this is sustainable? It obviously is sustainable for your members, but is it sustainable for the economy too?
Well, this is what I was going to say. Given the current climate, economic climate there is with everything that is happening, the uncertainties and all that, I think it is reasonable and I think it is sustainable what and how it's being done. Some people might differ to what is being negotiated and might think it's too long, but I think that it's exactly that. If we want to make this sustainable, we need to be reasonable. And reasonable is sometimes saying, well, look, it needs to be done in a certain way, prepared to accept that little bit of sacrifice, but in the end, getting what is ours.
And is that why you agreed in principle to a moratorium on sectorial claims? First of all, just explain to us what that actually means in practice.
So the moratorium, I think that perhaps a misunderstanding, certainly from our behalf. What was agreed that there would be sort of a stall in terms of what was happening around the claims during the public sector pay negotiations until the public sector pay negotiation was finished. Anything that was submitted before the public sector pay negotiations was going to be still looked into. And then, like I said, there was talks about there was a stall in terms of pay negotiations during the public sector. It was something that I obviously passed to the members when pay claims have come to our table. We said, look, right now we're doing the public sector pay negotiation. So in terms of pay packages, nothing is going to be looked at until after the public sector has been negotiated. I have no recollection. I can certainly tell you that I have not signed anything saying I agree to a moratorium after the public sector pay rise. There are things happening within departments. There are collectives still going on in terms of pay disputes, which I believe that even after the public sector pay rise, they still need addressing and looking into. So the agreement, I think it did make sense saying, look, whilst we're having the public sector pay negotiations, there needs to be a stall, because the last thing you want, you say, well, I want this percentage, or we agree that we warrant that we deserve this percentage. And then we look at what we're getting in the public sector, and if you look at it, it's got to be unsustainable to ask for that amount of money. So it needs to go par in par with what we're getting with the public sector pay rise. But after that, there's still going to be collectives that are doing things that perhaps go over and above what they have in their collective agreements and so on and so forth, which need to be looked into.
Okay, now looking at the broader picture, Gibraltar's economy, its future, there are those who are perhaps exercising, urging caution as to what could happen in the next 12 months. We know what's happening next week, but what are your broader thoughts on how the economy could perform in the next few months?
My thoughts, I think it opens a door to many positives with what's going to happen. Like I said, I think there's conflict and things happening in other countries which perhaps are more concerning than what we have, certainly on our plates, which could have obviously a negative economic effect on us. But nonetheless, in terms of the prosperity and what we're looking at, it depends really on how we work together to find that prosperity and to ensure that there is that prosperity and that growth within Gibraltar. But I think it opens the door to many good things, definitely. Like I said, it just depends on how we go about it and how we work together to ensure that that is the case.
Well, I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunities to catch up along the way and have some more and further analysis from you as to how that is going on. Darren Salisola, thank you very much for joining us. That was the take of the GGCA union on this year's budget. Coming up after the break, more reactions, more analysis, and we'll hear the views of the other union, or one of the other unions involved in the public sector pay negotiations, the Unite the Union. We'll also hear from the Gibraltar Federation of Small Businesses, and we'll hear from another representative of the private sector. Thank you very much for joining us so far. See you after the break. Welcome back to Viewpoint. We are talking budget and we are getting reactions from representative organizations and analysts on the measures introduced in the budget earlier this week. We are now joined by Unite the Union, specifically Donovan Correa, who has been heading the negotiations on public sector pay increases up until now for Unite the Union. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me ask you first what your overall reaction is to the announcements on the public sector pay settlement. Is it everything you expected, or are there any surprises in there?
There was only one surprise, but I'll start from the beginning.
Yes.
The actual announcement was more or less what the unions submitted by the end of May, beginning of June. So it did reflect a lot of what we would like in the proposal. The only surprise was the extra bit, which is the next 5 years or 4 years, which was that increase of inflation plus 1%. There was conversations with the Chief Minister on how about we look at a 10-year deal, and in a way, it on paper or in theory, it seems like a good idea. But we thought, well, let's deal with the 5-year and let's keep it at that. So, given that we didn't have any final correspondence from the Chief Minister or government on that issue, it came a bit of a surprise that the extra 5 years was included. So that's something to consider now with our members.
But it's a decade of two halves, isn't it? It's a 5-year recovery plan for a start. So let's talk about that. It's a 12.6% real terms loss since 2019. Does that meet with your estimation of what inflation has done to the average pay packet?
I think it's important to note that in keeping with the principle that the Chief Minister has always put, that we want to put the pay down to the lower earners and then see how we can assist on the higher earners. I do believe this deal was met in a way that if we actually did a calculation based on pay, then the lower earners would be worse off, because there have been, and we have to admit, there has been increases for the lower earners throughout the period and even during COVID. So the fact that we reached this compromise, I would say, whereby everyone below 100k gets the fair share of that 12.6%, which was calculated on a weighted average, seems somewhat of a logical compromise.
I imagine you don't have a lot of public sector members earning more than 100k, do you?
We probably have the lion's share of those individuals in United Unions, so therefore it was important that there was some form of recovery for these employees. And I would like to say as well that we have had correspondence back from the government whereby they will, on a no obligation basis, sit down with these members over 100k and discuss what further can be done, seeing that they're not going to get that full recovery. So those are conversations to be had, but at this moment in time, the 50% would apply to them. Should our members accept in ballot, which is another point we'll probably get to.
Oh, so you're going down that path now? You're going to...
That's always been the case. Unite will always ballot on pay. We will never accept pay unless our members have indicated that to us. We've had a mandate to negotiate, but we've never had a mandate to agree pay. So that will always be the case for us. Any democratic union will always negotiate and then ballot on pay because it's important.
And are you putting plans in place now to have that ballot?
As we speak, I am working with our conveners, working with my colleagues in the office to get workplace visits done. And as of next week, we'll be visiting workplaces, and it's going to be a hectic period for us. But I think it's important to get all the information to our members, clarify any points. We're in the process of clarifying points with the government as well. So we're back and forth with the government. There are certain elements of the deal, or we say proposal for us, is that they're not exactly clear. So before we go to our members, we're going to say, no, this is the clarification from the government. This is what this part of that proposal means. This is what that part means. So we're very clear when we're balloting. They know exactly what it is they're balloting on.
It might be early days yet, but in that scenario, would you be recommending to members either way that they vote in favour or against the deal?
Since 2023, when we had that 1,200 and 1,200 consolidated pay, it's been a position of the union that we would not recommend pay because at that moment in time we were seen as pushing our members to one side, and we don't want to be seen as that way. We want to be giving the information, being accurate, making sure they're fully aware. Of course, we give advice in the sense of this is the proposal and this is the potential consequence if we do not accept it, but that's then for the members to decide.
Okay. Let's talk about other things now. The minimum wage rising to £10 an hour. Are you happy with that?
Of course, we will never say that an increase is not positive. It has to be considered that it is positive, and I take the Chief Minister's point that since he took office, that it's been going up and up and up. However, it has to be said that if one lives and resides in Gibraltar, £10 an hour unfortunately doesn't cut it. It's not enough to survive. You might be lucky where you have government rental, where it's cheaper. But if you are down to the open market or rental, the reality is those people will struggle. So we would like to see it higher, but the reality is it's difficult when you're competing with the private sector in terms of businesses, which I understand they have competing interests, but the union will always stand by. Better pay means better conditions for all employees and our members, and that will allow them to live dignified lives.
Is it not the case, though, that the majority of minimum wage workers are cross-frontier workers, where the standard of living is lower?
I don't have the empirical evidence to prove that, but it goes without saying that the jurisdiction that you work in should reflect the cost of living in that jurisdiction. I can understand the point where if most of our labour in terms of that bracket of lower earners comes from Spain or anywhere else in the European Union, that you consider that, but that shouldn't be an excuse to keep minimum wage as artificially low as it is right now. We would always stand by, we would like to see it higher, but we understand the competing interests of the other parties.
The Chief Minister announced that there had been an agreement on a moratorium on sectoral claims. Is that something that you've conceded?
No, that's not correct. There was an an intention on behalf of the government when we initiated this process of negotiation by the three unions, that in consideration of a public sector agreement, which has been announced, that the government would like to see a moratorium on claims. We were adamant that that's not something Unite would concede. We even spoke to our working group, and that's something that we never accepted. The other two unions, for what I understand, have, and therefore that puts us apart. So therefore, on the record, it's important that we clearly state that Unite has not accepted moratorium on claims. What Unite did accept was that preference should be put towards public sector pay, but that any claims which are meritorious and actually have value and they're considered positively, we would take them forward, and then it would be up to the government to consider whether they would take it on or reject it, which is their prerogative. And at the end of the day, that is the status quo as it is right now. So it doesn't change much for us, but it's important that that is put on record on behalf of our members. So that's one of the concerns which we've raised previously. And obviously we have a watchful eye with the treaty, which is the implementation is next week. We've been on top of everything as much as we can, but even within departments that are directly affected, borders, customs, we have membership in both. And it has been quite hectic. It's been very difficult. A lot of people still do not feel comfortable because they're not sure exactly what's going to happen. So we're there assisting and supporting as much as we can. So that's one of our concerns as well.
The implementation of the treaty.
Yeah, and what that means to those members directly affected by the implementation in terms of borders and customs, for example.
Okay. Donovan Correa from Unite the Union, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're now joined by the chair of the Federation of Small Businesses, Owen Smith. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
Can you just get the Federation's initial thoughts, your initial reactions to the budget speeches throughout the week and the Chief Minister's own at the earlier part of the week?
Yes, I mean, as we speak, we haven't had an opportunity to fully digest what the Minister for Business has announced today because it's still in process. But we did have, obviously, an opportunity to hear the measures announced by the Chief Minister. I think for us, the most significant of which is the increase in the minimum wage. I think for many members that will come as something of a surprise. Because obviously it has a very significant impact on members who have employees that are paid minimum wage, and also comes at a time when many businesses are already facing a number of challenges resulting from the forthcoming treaty, and also a changing landscape as from next week. So I think there was significant hope in the business community that we would not see an increase in the minimum wage, but it has been included.
Had you made representations to that effect?
We're always keen and we're always making representations to government on these issues, and social insurance and tax is one of them. And we've been very keen to emphasise that this is a year where we hoped for there to be minimal change. I think that to some extent we've seen that. There's so far at least been no announcement in an increase in social insurance, which also has a significant impact on businesses, which is welcome. But yes, there has been an increase in the minimum wage.
So tell us about transaction tax, which will be the biggest change for many businesses. Is there anything in this budget that's new or surprising to you about how that will affect in practice?
I think, just immediately before we started recording, the Minister for Business announced for the first time a package of measures that involved direct financial assistance to business. That is very, very welcome, and will certainly, it sounds like it is designed to target those businesses that are at the thin end of the transaction tax wedge. So that is very welcome. I've heard it very briefly and haven't yet had a chance to properly digest it, so we will want to look at that in detail and reflect upon it, but that's obviously welcome. Obviously, for many businesses, the transaction tax, which comes effectively, although there is a transitional period, and in some circumstances it comes into effect next week, is a very significant development for many businesses that trade in goods. Many businesses are going to see an increase from low percentage or zero up to 15%. So they're seeing an up to 15% increase because the notional importation tax has been significantly lower. And that is going to be very challenging for many businesses.
And in terms of well, we know that it's designed to target price differentials, but competition across the border, is that something that you expect will be quite severe for your members, particularly in the retail sector?
So we obviously are going to see an increased ability to move across the border with ease, and that will have the effect, perhaps, of making it easier for people to choose to, say, shop or eat elsewhere. At the same time, we will see an end to the VAT refund from people purchasing in Spain, which will offset to some extent some of the price differential. Obviously, retailers in Gibraltar will now be paying a 15% importation on products at cost price, not retail price. But inevitably, I think we are going to see an increase in that sort of footfall type competition. The counterpoint to that, I think, is we hope that we will also see a large increase in visitors to Gibraltar. So we may see an increase in overall footfall, which will be very welcome. As to competition to the high street from things like internet retailers, like Amazon and so on, I think in the short term, we are less exposed to that because of the measures that are in place as part of the treaty, which restrict the ability of stores and delivery services to operate directly into Gibraltar. So I think we will still see a continuation of the sort of competition that exists today, which is where people are using sort of third-party operators to assist them in making online purchases. And how that develops over time is yet to be seen, but I think inevitably over time that competition is going to become far more frontline.
One of the biggest announcements in this year's budget has been the public sector pay deal. Mm-hmm. Does that have an impact on your members directly?
Well, it has, I think, an impact in two senses. One is that many employees in the private sector will look to what is happening in the public sector to inform their own demands for a pay increase if they get one. And the other is, of course, that the cost of operating the public sector impacts on the private sector, because ultimately it's the private sector that pay for it through taxes. So it does impact us, and one thing that I think is, I think sadly maybe absent from our discussion about the public sector is perhaps the need for always to look for efficiency and savings, and I think that needs to be part of the discussion when we talk about the benefits to the public sector through pay arrangements and so on. And certainly one thing that we have engaged with the government on over a period of years is the need to set out clear performance criteria in certain sectors and for certain operations, for in particular business-facing operations, so that the public and the business community can understand how the public sector is delivering it value for money.
Okay. And in terms of the equalisation of the retirement age, the pensionable age, is there any comment that the GFSP has to make about that? Or is...
I mean, I think that has definitely been coming for some time. The reduction in the state aid pension in Gibraltar, or the access to that the state old age pension, it certainly flows in the opposite direction to what is happening in many countries elsewhere. It will place additional fiscal pressure on the government at a time when perhaps we should be looking to reduce the fiscal pressure on government. And the concern of the private sector, obviously, is that we will end up ultimately footing that bill. When we have increased demands on services and increased outflow of government expenditure, and the state pension will be one of those. That means that things have to be tightened up elsewhere, and I think we sometimes feel in the private sector that we pay the price and we also pay the bills. I think the residency criteria is an example of that, where the restrictions are being put in place on new, to some extent that will impact on new economic activity because of the pressure that the government has experienced in terms of the delivery of services.
You've already spoken about the minimum wage as something that you hoped not to see in the budget, but you did. Is there anything that you hoped to see but didn't?
Well, the main thing that we always look for in the budget, and in terms of what's happening with the treaty, we have seen it this year, which is direct support for business, financial support for business, is incentives for business. Is a comment that we make nearly every year. We want to see an environment for conducting business which is strategic and incentivize investment, growth, and economic activity. And we don't often see that sort of content in our budget. For example, tax incentives for employing in certain areas or conducting activity in a certain area, or the availability of grants and loans. There is a business loan scheme in Gibraltar, but it's comparatively small if you look at what is available elsewhere. For example, in the United Kingdom, access to that sort of capital or facilitating it would be highly beneficial, and that's the sort of incentivizing of private business that we would like to see more often in the annual budgets.
Owen Smith from the GFSB, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Our next guest is the CEO of Chesterton's estate agent and also the curator of the quite popular Bite-Size Brief. Mike Nichols, welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you for having me.
How many subscribers do you have at this stage?
5,389.
Is that more than you bargained for?
When I started, it was about 300, so yes, more than I bargained for.
But it does actually serve a purpose in the sense that you keep a very close eye on the local economy. So based on your experience of having curated that information service, what are your initial observations on this year's budget and the economic performance of the local economy?
I think the economic performance is very good. So I think a congratulations to everybody, private sector, public sector, government, because we have done well as a jurisdiction through some tough times. And we have got an extraordinarily positive treaty given the cards we were dealt. And I think people recognise that, and I think there's a lot of people who need credit. If you look at the responses I get to the Bite-Size Brief, there's a lot of people who have a footprint in Gibraltar. They've bought off-plan property not yet finished. They own property they intended to move into. They were married here, served here in the forces. They had all these plans to be here, and then October 6th came, and that's just shunted their plans to possibly the never, never. So there's quite a few people who are upset, who wanted to come to Gibraltar. They wouldn't necessarily be freeloaders. I think many of them would be quite happy to have their private medical. Many of them are older, so they're unlikely to use schools or their children to use schools. And to be a sector who give to the community, are in clubs and societies, go to restaurants 3 or 4 times a week when we're all working. And I think that spending power is going to go.
You're referring, of course, to the residency restrictions?
The residency restrictions, yes. So I probably strayed from the question. The economy is good, but the concern now is what does Gibraltar look like in a few years? And the fabric will be very different to what it is now. When we recruit businesses, as we want to do, the rules now are that once you finish working, we could recruit someone who, say, is 50, works for 14 years, pays all his taxes, does very well, and then wants to retire. Well, he will not be allowed to retire here because of the 20-year rule. So therefore, if you're someone thinking of moving to Gibraltar with a business, then you might think, well, hang on, I can work my socks off, establish their children through the school, whatever, but if I finish after 15 years, I'm going to be thrown out. And that makes us a little bit less attractive. So I'm concerned about 1 or 2 things, but answering your question, because I have strayed, the economy has done extremely well, given everything thrown at us in the last 10 years.
Well, since you've moved on to residency restrictions, let me ask you this, because of course you are the CEO of an estate agent. Estate agents, a lot of employees perhaps work on commissions, so their salaries might be lower than the average. So how does it affect you in terms of well, you and other estate agents instead of employers where thresholds have to meet £37,500?
I think that's really going to impact us, not just estate agents, but anyone that offers relatively low basic, but then good commissions from the sales that the team or they generate. We have 20 people. We only have one person above 37,500 basic. We paid quite well, but it's a percentage of sales. We will naturally lose 1 or 2 people a year, and unemployment is wonderfully virtually zero in Gibraltar. So that means we would have to recruit from outside. So our choices are British, 37,500, presumably basic, and that would mess up my pay structure. But I think it would be an impact not just on Chestons, on not just estate agents, anyone in that sales environment. So there's going to be some challenges of that. The alternative, of course, is we go into Spain and recruit from Spain. But if we, in our industry, really want someone with estate agency experience from the UK, because there's so many parallels, then recruitment's going to be a bit more challenging.
So one of the reflections that the Chief Minister made in his budget address was that the GDP has nearly trebled since 2011. GDP per capita is top 3 in the world. How has this economic growth been reflected in the property market, for example?
I think if you take the property market and forget the few bumps, we had a bump in 2008 and we had a COVID bump for obvious reasons, albeit once out of COVID, 1 or 2 years of not many transactions, we bounced back, with some vigour. The property market has probably matched the GDP growth. So despite properties being built all over the place, the property prices have gone up probably in line with the GDP. But that's because the population has also gone up. So we now have 38,000 people. And if we're adding 400, 500 people a year, well, they have to live somewhere. So we have to keep building to match that growth, unless we are limiting growth in population, which the new residency requirements may do. But I think property has matched GDP growth, and I think it's the economy has performed well.
Okay. The treaty is expected to create a more fluid border.
Mm-hmm.
Do you expect that to affect demand, property-wise, in Gibraltar or in Spain? Which way will it go?
Which way will it go? So Gibraltar doesn't just offer expensive property. It comes with British-style schooling, British-style health, English language, GBP, not euros, Morrison's, not Mercadona. And there's a value to that for many. So lots of those people won't want to live in Spain anyway. I think the fluid border will open people's eyes to shall we live in Spain or shall we live in Gibraltar. There's still the tax treaty from about 2019, which says if you become a resident of Spain and then tax resident of Spain and then subsequently move to Gibraltar, you're decreed as tax resident of Spain for a further 4 years. So if someone's on, say, 40,000 and doesn't think they'll ever earn much more than 40,000, Spain might be the right answer. But if that £40,000 a year person thinks they're going to be on 60, 80, 100, become entrepreneur of the year, then they would be well advised to start their life in Gibraltar. So I think the fluid border will go each way. Anyone living in Gibraltar now could be living in Spain before, and they're not. So it's the other attractions which are probably keeping them here. But then the other thing, we have to keep coming back to residency, because unless you earn 37,500, you're probably not going to come and live here. If you're British, you may not be guaranteed a place to live in Spain. So in 2016, we had Brexit. The property market responded to that by building hundreds of studios, because we all thought the border was going to close and we needed all our workers in. It's turned out to be the opposite. The border's going to be more open than ever. So now you think, well, who's going to live in those studios? Because we put a limit of 37,500 and the border is open. So from the property market point of view, do they all become Airbnb? Possibly. Is that good? Might be. We'll have to see.
So we're in one of those situations where we have a treaty, we have perhaps uncertainty in the business community because of the transaction tax, and we've heard representative organizations representing businesses say, well, you know, we've done this public sector pay deal, we've equalized pensionable age, we've raised the minimum wage. There are concerns about how is this all going to be afforded. Is this a legitimate concern, or is it more is it a case of, like, because of the size of the economy growing, it's just one of those things that we can now afford?
I think it's a very legitimate concern, because the public sector have now been given inflation plus pay rises for the next 10 years. So it will now be difficult to recruit in the private sector, because the public sector becomes even more attractive than it already was. Could I offer someone a job with inflation plus every year for 10 years? Absolutely not. So the public sector is going to outperform the private sector in its ability to recruit in the mainstream. And although no government can actually commit future governments to doing what they've done, it'll be very difficult to unwind that. And then on the pension thing, it's quite good because I'm 60 in October, so well timed. However, every other European country is going the other way. And how can it be affordable, and how can we put that on our private sector, our next generation, to be so generous? Surely the right thing to do is to slowly, surely, phased approach, edge it upwards. Why are we so different to the rest of Europe? So is it affordable? Well, the Chief Minister thinks so. But it's ballsy, if I can say that.
Mike Nichols, CEO of Chesterton's, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's Viewpoint for this week. All the reactions from Budget Week. Next week, it's another special week. It's Treaty Implementation Week, and Viewpoint will be chaired by our news editor, Christine Vasquez, who will have the current Chief Minister and the previous Chief Minister on her panel. So join us then. Thank you very much for watching, and good night.